Welcome, everybody. You're all very, very welcome, no matter where you're joining from, whether it be Ireland, north, south, east, or west, or indeed across Europe or further afield. Maybe like to hear a little bit where you're joining from in the chat if you feel so inclined. Particular welcome to all IDEA members and also to anybody who's new to IDEA. Those that are new, just to give you a very short overview, we're the national network in Ireland for development, education and global citizenship education. And we represent over 100 members involved in this practice. That's organizations and individuals across formal, non-formal, the whole spectrum of learning, universities, workplaces, community centres, primary, secondary, and so on. And if you're not familiar with development education, sometimes known as global citizenship education, or more recently, more so known as that, it's an educational process that enables people to understand what I think is fair to say is a very rapidly changing world, but certainly an interdependent world and very much on unequal worlds, and to help people understand their role and their power and find their voice and the skills to help transform it for the better. So IDEA works across multiple fields. We have a code of good practice where it has 12 principles. I won't go through them all here, but very much about exploring root causes of local and global injustices and contributing to the knowledge ecosystem. But this webinar series on exploring contemporary issues, it's really an opportunity to engage practitioners to help understand some of the bigger issues that are very present and topical right now, develop their practice, create relationships with others, and as Lizzie said, to engage in an open space kind of framework to explore some of those issues. So nothing that is said throughout this, as Lizzie said, it is about the Chatham House rules, but also nothing that is said represents all of our members or indeed all of our funders or partners. So it's important that we do hear a diversity of views as we go along. We're about to begin, but just to frame in on some of what we're talking about. Well, firstly, I just want to acknowledge that as we join here together, there is a flotilla making its way to Gaza. It has many, many Irish people involved, and indeed many people from around the world. And it's to try and break the barbaric siege of Gaza during these times of genocide. It's very much linked to this theme and topic today, but we want to express our solidarity, some people involved in that, and hope that they have safe passage and that indeed there is appropriate protection and intervention offered to them. So on the theme of boycott, divestment and sanctions, obviously it relates to multiple causes, multiple issues, multiple countries. We're looking at some of the historical aspects, and indeed it is something that it is in our national consciousness. But from an ideas perspective, we've also been working with members on the concept of apartheid free zones, something we'll touch on again later. We have been preparing with a Palestine working group in recent years, a declaration and an audit framework. It links to the IDEA Code of Good Practice. And just recently, we've done work on exploring our own kind of procurement strategies and policies. And that just recently has resulted in us changing our insurance provider. And so it's something we're very much trying to practice what we preach. It's very much a learning curve and a learning journey, which again, we'll touch on today. This is not about getting everything perfect. It's about finding small steps and creating a kind of unified steps towards a bigger movement. So keen to hear more about what everyone has to say, particularly from the educational point of view, to help learners understand what it is that BDS means, what it involves, and how it might be implemented across a range of settings. So that was a huge kind of lengthy introduction from myself. And now we get to get moving with our wonderful lineup of speakers. So our first speaker is Giorgia Gusciglio. You're very welcome, Giorgia. And Giorgia is the Europe coordinator for the BDS campaign at the Palestine BDS National Committee. It's the largest coalition of Palestinian society leading the global BDS movement. And in Giorgia's role, she supports movement building and campaign efforts of partners, grassroots collectives, civil society, trade union, activist groups as part of the BDS movement across Europe, focusing specifically on North and East Europe. And she's been an activist since 2021. And before that, she was involved in different collectives pro-Palestine solidarity across Italy. She's a background in political science, sociology, and the Swana region. And before joining BNC, she supported communications efforts as part of the team of different membership-based civil society organizations at the European level. So can't wait to hear from her. Thank you again to everybody for joining. We look forward to hearing your comments and your views. And we will welcome Giorgia now to the screen to hear from her today. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rory. And thanks a lot to Lizzie for inviting me and to the interpreters for their very important work as well. Well, first of all, it's really a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm connecting from Brussels, Belgium, very sunny here. And it's great to be among learners, educators, practitioners, members of civil society organizations that do amazing work on education of all forms. So I'm here to tell you a bit about what BDS is, what it wants, what it called for, how it in practice it works, some impacts that the BDS movement has achieved in 20 years of people power, and how hopefully we can get more and more people involved in the struggle. Yes, I hope it works. Yes, okay. So the BDS movement is a worldwide anti-racist, non-violent, and intersectional solidarity movement with Palestinians. Is rooted in the respect of international law and human rights. It's based on arterial change, is about grassroots activism, organizing, and campaigning to reach enough people power to change policy, to have an impact and end complicity. And of course, it's also in decades and inspired by decades of Palestinian popular resistance, but it's also especially in the struggle that ended apartheid in South Africa, but also other decolonial struggles like the US civil rights movements and other struggles in the Global South against colonialism and oppression. And it was launched in 2005 as what Rory mentioned, by the largest coalition of Palestinian society. Over 170 Palestinian organizations came together to launch the global BDS movement, representing what we call the three components of Palestinian society. So Palestinians of 48, what is today the State of Israel, Palestinians living under occupation in West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza, and the biggest part of Palestinians, which is Palestinians living in exile and have been displaced and uprooted by Israel from 1948 onwards. All of this, you can see some of the names of the organizations are trade unions, civil society organizations, farmers' committees, students' organizations, women's committees, refugee committees. It's a very diverse spectrum of civil society and organizations that lead the global BDS movement, and that gives direction to what the movement does and calls for. And so it's very important as a solidarity movement. I think this is very special that we have a leadership, Palestinian leadership, that leads and shows us the way of what needs to be done as our role in the solidarity movement. And of course, as I said, it's a anti-racist movement. It targets complicity and not identity, and institutions and not individuals. And we target, of course, Israeli corporations, institutions, and their role in enabling Israel's set colonial, apartheid, and illegal occupation, and now genocidal regime that have deprived Palestinians of its fundamental rights since 1948. And we do so with a strong, nonviolent, action-oriented work. We are deeply rooted in decades of it's Palestinian popular resistance and boycotts that have carried out the movement and inspired the movement until today. And we do so not by standing alone. The Palestinian solidarity movement is also deeply connected with struggles for racial, economic, social, climate, and gender justice. We work and we stand together with workers, with women, with LGBT communities, with racialized communities in ending all forms of oppression, all forms of discrimination, and to achieve justice, freedom, and equality for all. And also because we believe that all these struggles are interconnected, and that's the answer, and the work that we need to do needs to be in coordination, in joint campaigning, and to end all chains of oppression everywhere. So what do we call for as BDS? In 2005, when the Palestinian BDS National Committee, leading the global BDS movement, was funded, it came together around the BDS call that is based on 3 principles. On these 3 principles, there is the biggest consensus inside Palestine and outside of Palestine. These 3 pillars, in principle, are the basic condition and requirements for Palestinians to win their self-determinations. And around these 3 principles, Palestinians have been able to overcome the fragmentations that, unfortunately, is still very much present because of, as a result of Israel's regime of occupation, of apartheid, and denying Palestinians' right to return. And so what the Palestinians demand the end of occupation and the colonization of all Arab lands and the dismantlement of the illegal apartheid wall, the recognition of equality, full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, and the most important principle, which is respecting, promoting, and enabling the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their lands, as recognized by international law. But how do Palestinians want the Solidarity Movement to act? The Palestinians are very conscious that Israel is able to maintain its regime of oppression, discrimination, apartheid, illegal occupation, and since October 2023, live-stream genocide, because of complicity of state, corporations, and institutions. When states continue to trade with Israel, when financial institutions continue to invest in companies that operate in Israel, when universities continue to cooperate with Israeli institutions, when business as usual is perpetuated, is what allows Israel to continue violating Palestinian rights and international law. And thus our response as BDS movement needs to be cutting all the chains of complicity and ending the support that Israel is receiving from all these actors in our system. But also, BDS is not just an ethical, moral duty based on the principle of doing no harm, but also since especially the groundbreaking International Court of Justice advisory opinion of July 2024, BDS is now also a legal obligation, especially for states. States that have the duty not to trade, not to assist, not to enable Israel to continue its regime of racial discriminations, occupation, and genocide. And thus, they have to act to end their complicity. But so, how do we end complicity? How do we stand in solidarity in a meaningful, concrete way with Palestinians, which is what they demand from us? We do so by doing Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign. And we have, across all of these different works and in the way we do intersectional principle strategic campaigning, we have an especially important principle that we call strategic radicalism. This is about finding a golden balance between being impactful and being principled, between being strategic and not giving up our values and the core of our principles. And so it means that we need to keep thinking about how to keep defending what our values are, but also building enough people power to change the situation. And we do so with these 3 principles: gradualness, understanding that unfortunately, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and we need to keep building gradual people power to get us to our ultimate goals by having smaller objectives that help us getting closer and closer to the top. Being sustainable means taking risks, but taking care, because we all deeply care, we all want to keep working, but burnout is an issue that activists, collectives, groups also face. And also that we cannot go from one campaign to another without forgetting what we already achieved. And we need to defend what we already achieved in order to move forward. And last but not least, context sensitivity. All BDS campaigns, of course, need to be adapted and changed based on the context because, well, you're in Ireland. Ireland is a very specific, powerful context where solidarity with Palestine is remarkable. And what works here would never work in a country like France or Germany. And so we always need to adapt tactics, strategies, messaging based on the context we are in, because that will affect if and how our campaigns work, if and how our intersectional approach works, and connecting the struggle all the way. And so, of course, BDS, the most famous thing of BDS is that we do boycotts. But how do we do boycotts is very important because, of course, each and every one of us can boycott individually, but the real power lies in collective, strategic, and targeted boycott to keep building power so that we get to an impact. And so with the BDS movement, we say, you need to be strategic, you need to be focused, you need to be targeted. Let's focus our efforts not on endless lists of targets, but on specific ones where we can build power and have enough power to end their complicity. And we have 4 criteria. I don't want to go too much into this. I just want everyone to know. We always assess with this criteria when we need to endorse, we want to launch a campaign against a specific boycott target. We look at the complicity level. We look at intersectionality. So is this target also related or committing crimes and violations against other groups, other people? Is it a target that can be tackled by a climate perspective, by a racial justice perspective? So we always need to keep that in mind. Is this brand known? Is this a target that everyone can know? Because if we need to spend all our energy making a target known, that's going to drain a lot of the resources that we have. And last but not least, can we win this? Because there is nothing worse than despair and hopelessness. And we need to make sure that people can feel that they're part of something that give them power and bring them closer to their goal. And so this is the most broad, comprehensive list of boycott targets that we address in different ways and we give different priorities. But it's the one that we want people to keep in mind when they do collective boycotts, consumer boycott campaigns or pressure campaigns around these targets. And I will share the slides with the organizers so they can easily share them with you all. But of course, boycott also means academic, cultural, and sports boycott. We have seen major disruption, major campaigns around La Vuelta in Spain, the Giro d'Italia in Italy, disrupting cycling races with Palestinian solidarity and flags. And we have, so I'm just checking the chat that I'm not missing. But we also have now more and more cultural artists and people from the sector joining in the cultural boycott of Israel, and more universities cutting ties with complicit Israeli universities. And then, of course, the D in BDS stands for divestment. And this is work that is done vis-a-vis pension funds, financial institutions like banks, unions, churches that invest money in specific companies. And what we demand from them is having an ethical investment policy that excludes all those companies that are involved in grave human rights violations anywhere, especially targeting those that are deeply involved in violations against Palestinians. And here there is a lot of documentation that we can provide with looking at, reliable sources and well-referenced sources that have mapped the complicity. And then the last but not least, actually, the S in BDS, which is the most important one, it's sanctions. And what do we mean by sanctions? We mean, as I said before, a legal obligation under international law that needs to start with a military embargo. It needs to start with ending all military export, import, and transfer of weapons and military components to Israel and from Israel. But also energy, because energy it's considered also a very important asset for Israel's genocidal machine that fuels his fighter jets, that fuels his machines of death. But also it means ending free trade agreements like the EU-Israel Association Agreement, like any trade agreement that allows Israeli products on our markets, but also companies to operate in illegal situations. But it also means that we can trigger like work done at the local level, like municipalities and city councils, that can actually exclude from their procurement also companies that are complicit with Israel's regime by adopting an ethical procurement policy that we'll talk about it in a couple of minutes. And then, of course, what we want at the international level is to suspend Israel from all international fora, like South Africa under apartheid was. So expel it from FIFA, Eurovision, the Olympics, and the UN. But what's the strength of the movement that's turned 20 years, July in 2025, is that it's a proof tool for impact. We have seen in the last 3-4 years alone a major impact that we have achieved in all the different B, D, and S of the movement. We have seen countries for the first time implementing military embargoes against Israel, like Spain, like Colombia, like South Africa. We have seen countries refusing to let the ships going to Israel dock in their ports, like in Malaysia. We have seen dock workers in Europe, especially in Italy, refusing to handle cargo, military cargo that was going to Israel. But we also seen the power of boycotts, like against Coca-Cola, against McDonald's, and the power of cultural boycotts, like thousands of artists that have pledged to not do collaboration with Israeli complicit institutions. And I just want to bring you a small victory. This is something that happened very recently in March, thanks to people power, trade union, workers power, activists on the ground, and also principled policymakers. We managed to block almost 600 tons of military grade steel in 2 ports in Italy, and but also thanks to the work in Spain and Greece that refused to let the ship dock. We now have confiscated this material that it's under inspection in Italy at the moment. And so this has shown that we can take action also along the supply chain with supporting workers that want to do conscientious objection and not be complicit with these crimes. And so we also know, because of all this massive people power and work, that BDS is a threat of the highest degree for Israel. They are recognized and they put a lot of pressure, a lot of resources in that. So all this said, while I'm here, I also want you all to join or keep doing BDS. And you can do so by starting and joining a BDS campaign that exists on the ground. And of course, there's amazing work being done in Ireland, in the north, in the south by the International Solidarity Campaign or BDS groups, but also in universities and inside trade unions and at the level of municipalities. So join those initiatives and support those efforts to keep pressuring Ireland to end its complicity. But also there is this really beautiful campaign. It's a very intersectional campaign that we recently launched, and we have a tool, very practical tool for doing this, and it's around pressuring municipalities to have an ethical procurement that excludes complicit corporation from doing businesses with their municipality. And we have a campaign tool and a legal tool that guides activists and civil servants and mayors and city councillors step by step in the process to be as less complicit as possible and not use public money to reward war crimes and crimes against humanity. But of course, also we have this beautiful Apartheid Free Zone that we're going to hear more about it from other colleagues and comrades here today, that it's about creating spaces free from all forms of oppression and complicity as well. Let us all remind us that it's Palestine that is freeing us all, in showing all the link of complicity, all the systems of oppression that are interconnected and benefiting from exploitation, from violations and from crimes. And so it is our duty to keep supporting Palestinians in the struggle for self-determination, for freedom, for justice and equality, so that we can all be free. And until then, I'll be here fighting alongside all you all for that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Giorgia. That was really, really powerful and inspiring, and your energy is so infectious. And the work you've been doing in Italy and across Europe during very, very difficult few years. Particularly, you brought in the whole area of self-care and well-being and trying to sustain the energy. But you've clearly managed to sustain the energy very well. But I suppose we also have to remember, as I think you have done so well, that it is the Palestinians that have sustained so much energy, that have given us and continue to give us hope. So it's it's hard to comprehend the pain and depth of suffering that is out there and continues to be, which is why this work remains ever, ever important. So thank you so much, Giorgia. I appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing more from you. Let's move on to our next speaker. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from one of IDEA's member organizations, Friends of the Earth, and that is Jayne Geraghty, who is, I absolutely love her job title, Head of Movement Building at Friends of the Earth Ireland. And Jayne is a trainer, facilitator, professional community development and youth worker with over a decade of experience working in the climate justice movement. She's passionate about creating the necessary conditions that centre and support young people in particular, and all communities that have been marginalised by systemic justice and or are facing the front lines of climate change impacts, to play a significant role in the feminist just energy transition. She has led and implemented innovative projects for climate justice, youth education and empowerment, human rights, and also traveller and Roma rights in Ireland at an EU level and internationally. So very much looking forward to hearing from Jayne for the next 15 minutes or so. You're very welcome, Paulcha.
Thanks so much. Wow, how to follow that, Giorgia? That was great. Thank you so much. I think it's always really beneficial for us to be reminded of the full context of why BDS. So I just really appreciate that. And so thank you for everything that you shared with us. I guess what I'm going to share, I didn't bring any slides because I think sometimes it can detract a little bit, like when you're trying to just share a specific story. So I'm hoping to try and just share the story of maybe how Friends of the Earth have approached this. And hopefully it might be useful for different groups. So we're a national member group of a wider international federation. And I know that that's similar maybe for some of our development education groups, which are also IDEA members. So I hope that I can share some of what we've done at national level, but also maybe a little bit about what's been going on at an international level as well, and ways in which we as a national organisation have influenced that, which might be helpful on this topic of BDS. So I suppose travelling back to October 2023, really staff came together with management, and we had an internal agreement that we wanted to avoid all new purchases of goods and services from suppliers on the BDS list. And in particular, we have a lot of like HP IT equipment. And so we decided we wanted to stop anything new from happening. And there was an internal request from staff in Friends of the Earth Ireland to become an apartheid free zone in line with the BDS campaign movement. And I think that that's really important. It really came from staff, like really, you know, we cared. This was a representation of our values, and it was a way for us to really bridge that personal and professional kind of piece of work, which I think is really essential, because the personal is political, and like how we do that and feel comfortable in our working lives is also very important, and how we can shift and create change and leverage the power of our organizations is really important, and not to forget our role as staff, even sometimes challenging that discomfort of maybe naming it. So I think that that was really great that it came from staff. We did a review of resources using kind of the BDS movement apartheid free zone kind of guide and toolkit. So thank you for those. And we did an audit of our existing suppliers. We started to draft our apartheid free zone declaration at that point, but it took us quite a long time. So that was kind of in October 2024 actually, and it took us quite some time to get to a point where we actually had it published and launched. And the reason, you know, there was many reasons for that. I suppose we were kind of waiting to see about whether we were going to be able to renew our employee assistance program, or whether we were going to take the decision to cut that. There was a few other things going on internally, which caused us to kind of delay that from when we first started working on it to when it actually then was launched, our declaration. And so I would just say in that process, don't get disheartened. stick with it and keep going. Sometimes hurdles will be thrown at you, but you continue with it. We made the decision to basically cut our ties with our employee assistance program with Leia Healthcare. And that was, I suppose, both an easy and difficult one to do, because we were in a position where financially we couldn't afford to replace it with something that wasn't on the BDS list. So it really was a challenge in that sense for staff who, this was kind of the opportunity to be able to seek counselling services and other things like that. And so we've had a bit of a journey around that. So we made the decision to cut it, knowing as staff that there was going to be no easy alternative in the short term. And so now we've been working on that medium term of like trying to identify our other paths, and we've only recently this year been voting on what our alternatives are and what we would like to see happen with that. But we took that decision in 2024. Then we went ahead, we joined the Idea Development Education Palestine Working Group, who had developed the declaration for Apartheid Free Zones, and we kind of revisited our declaration that had been drafted and redrafted it. It was signed off by board and management in April last year. And we actually launched it in June last year. We put it on our website, we put it on social media, and we sent it out in an email to all of our supporters to make sure that it was really visible. And, this was a way for us to be able to highlight our commitment to BDS, but also make that relationship, to what's going on in Palestine, and ways, that you could take further action as well. So this is just one thing we're doing, and these were the other ways that we were able to signpost as well. And that's kind of been a commitment we've had, I suppose, which is separate to BDS, but just important to mention, I suppose, just that ongoing communication with our supporters about Palestine and about BDS, and about the different ways that you can take action, and BDS being one of them. So that's one of the things that we've kind of kept in there. We've also been reviewing things to do like our insurance, and that's up again this year for further discussion. We've also done things like an external or an internal audit of other suppliers, to revisit and see where else were we. So that's kind of become an annual thing now, looking to see what else on the list can we go through, and how can we take further steps. And some of these things aren't short, easy decisions to make. As an NGO which has limited, funds, and we're quite held by our funders. So this is something that I think we're all facing, but it's something to be really mindful of, that you can take certain steps. And one that I would highlight that we've recently taken more steps on, we're not quite there yet, but we've definitely made a big stride, as we've moved away from Microsoft 365, and this has kind of been a big shift. It was a harder one. We didn't know if and how we were going to be able to step away. And so it started where we had a conversation within the team about Microsoft and about some of the possible alternatives, the ways that might impact our work. It might impact our work with our groups, just looked at all the various options, short, medium, and long term. And then staff were presented with various options to be able to vote on that. And it was only March this year that we took a decision that we wouldn't continue paying for Microsoft 365, with the exception of one license, which is actually for our finance team. It was felt that in the short term, we weren't going to be able to step away from that without concrete alternatives and training and things put in place to support external audit processes and other things with accountants at this moment. But it's definitely, we are getting away from Microsoft eventually, and we have a plan to continue reviewing that feasibility of the finance license also being relinquished in the near future. So that's our hope, and we're looking for in an ongoing way, looking for other sources of funding to be able to enable us to take further strides, in particular around our tech and IT. I think that's the part that's been the hardest. I think things that just impact staff, like our employee benefits and things like that, like our pension, was already we had already had an ethical pension and things like that. So some things were easier to drop or to change or move away from than others. And I think the tech one has been a real challenge, particularly Google products. We haven't stepped into the Google one yet because so many of our groups and external allies and relationships still work with Google, and it ends up being a real messy one. So we're looking at various things actually with our colleagues through the Friends of the Earth International Federation, and we're putting in place steps to be able to help us to do that, to get away from various products for collaborative working and learning and things like that, to enable us to continue working collaboratively, but moving away from these big tech giants. I think it's useful to say, so this is kind of where we're at now, on the latest steps that we've just taken internally. But I think within our federation, I think it's still helpful to name maybe some of the steps that have been taken in that regard. So we're a part of the Friends of the Earth Europe. So we have regions in Friends of the Earth International. And within the European region, we've a working group working on Palestine action. And within that group, we've done quite a lot of different things, in terms of campaigns and actions to highlight Enlight, which is an Israeli renewable energy company, and trying to tackle that. We've been doing things to do with the ECI and supporting the ECI. We've also been doing work to combat and tackle the EU-Israel Association Agreement. So various different elements. But one of the things that emerged from the work that we've been doing in that working group has been to develop a BDS motion for Friends of the Earth International. So because we're an international federation, every 2 years we would have our biannual general meeting, where all of the member groups from across the world come together. And so last year was the year that we were having that BGM, we call it. So we were having it in Bangladesh, and we wanted to bring a motion on BDS. And we knew that there had been hope to try and discuss this at the previous one in 2023, but there had been so much tension. It was a really difficult space. There was a lot of mixed feelings in the room, as you can imagine, because that was November 2023, so right after things had kicked off. So anyways, we knew that we wanted to approach this in a different way. So one of the things we did, so we drafted that, and Friends of the Earth Ireland and Friends of the Earth Spain were really leading on this motion. And it was really a motion on the agreement to support BDS and the BDS movement in solidarity with Palestinian people. And it was twofold, I suppose. On the one hand, it was really trying to push for, that Friends of the Earth International would be able to publicly endorse its support for the BDS movement, which had been a real challenge in a lot of our movement spaces, where BDS, was really already being committed to publicly by other organizations and allies that we work with regularly, and that this was something that we were finding difficult to sign on to each time because of BDS being named. And we also wanted, in terms of Friends of the Earth International, to support BDS, targets in our work and our, what's being bought, what's not, procurement, everything like this, but also wanted to urge member groups to also consider implementing BDS campaigns and actions within their capacity where possible too. So we knew that this was going to be very contentious, given what the previous 2023 BGM had produced. So actually with that, I was on the executive committee for Friends of the Earth International for the last 2 years. So did some soft outreach to the groups that we knew were going to be struggling with BDS being raised as a motion at an international level, and what this would mean for their work and their context. And that meant, usually you can bring a motion right up until while you're sitting there at the BGM in plenary, you can still raise a motion in that moment. But we knew that something like this was going to require a lot of discussion at national level. Some of the structures of different member groups might require board approval, agreement, engagement, or even local groups. And so we wanted to give as much time as possible. And so we did that. We drafted the motion back in September last year. We brought it to those groups in draft format in October. And what was really important about that was that it gave an opportunity, I suppose, to create a space where these groups were given a space to share their concerns, to highlight their red lines where it came to this space around dialogue around BDS. And the aim wasn't necessarily for us to get them to start leading a BDS campaign at national level, given their context and the known challenges they're facing. But I suppose our aim was more so to ensure that insofar as possible, that they weren't going to be blocking other groups or Friends of the Earth International from supporting, from signing on, and being able to make further progress around BDS. So this really was something that we wanted to do. We also wanted to take this approach because with the hope that it would reduce potential harm of bringing really opposing viewpoints that are quite tense into the same space for dialogue. And what I mean by that perhaps is just that we were, for the most part, the groups that were quite opposed to BDS in general, or being really outspoken on Palestine, were very challenged by their funding circumstances. And so many of them had lost huge amounts of funding. And understandably, in their context, this was a massive issue. It was resulting in, threats to staff layoffs and a lot of real issues and concerns for them, of course. But I suppose what we were trying to avoid by doing this outreach process in advance was creating a space where they could be heard. I could listen to those and allow those feelings and concerns land without it needing to be raised and elevated in a space where it's being put on an equal par, where we're talking about our Palestinian comrades who are living through genocide. So that was something that we really wanted to avoid, was these concerns getting equal space in a way that put them into competition with one another. The realities are different, and the responses and the spaces needed to be responded to differently. So that was something that we tried to do, and it was responded to really well by those groups who were really challenged. We didn't have those groups go and vote in favour of BDS, but what we did achieve in terms of impact, as I see it, I think one of the great impacts of having taken that approach to do advanced outreach and engagement and allow for participation, meant that we were able to not have the motion blocked. So groups that absolutely told us we would have, if you had raised this in the way that other motions were told, only with a short amount of time, or only at the BGM, we would have had no choice but to vote and block and against this. But they were able to remain neutral, and it meant that the motion passed. So we were delighted. So I think that that's just one thing to name, that it's possible to do things to have an impact. And I think it just allowed for the conversation and dialogue in the BGM to be met without the strong emotions that I know we all have on these topics, which often can be polarized. So I think that was really, really useful. I hope that that's helpful for groups, particularly who are coming from the same kind of maybe international context that we work within as well, or even national networks, just ways that you can influence. And maybe it might mean changing your approach, and not having the expectation that everybody's going to be on board, but that shouldn't hold you back. That's just me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was really, really comprehensive, and it's really fascinating to hear about the complexity of different types of organizations, particularly yourselves having all those different links and indeed different perspectives. I know from traveling to other countries that not every country has the same level of solidarity, and you can meet more opposition, more resistance, more complexity. So it's interesting to hear how you work through some of that. You're very, very welcome. We're going live, I believe, to Kinvara, County Galway, well known to IDEA as an IDEA member, working with Financial Justice Ireland. And she's joined as part, in this context, of Kinvara Action Group. And alongside Vicky is John Griffin and Frank Naughton. And we're going to hear from them just about very much the global to the local here, and bringing solidarity into the community, and really touching on the work in Kinvara. I don't know if anybody knows it here, but it's a particularly beautiful, I might say small town, might say village, depends where you're from. It's certainly not a huge place, but it certainly is a beacon of Palestinian solidarity. When you drive by, you notice it in the shops, you notice it flags. And a lot of that emanated in the work that happened in 2014 when the group started approaching businesses in Kinvara, encouraging them to participate in the boycott of Israeli goods during yet another period of bloodshed and violence in Palestine. That action was recognised not just around Ireland, but also internationally for the power and depth of its solidarity. And it's since and continues to spark discussions and ripples, not just in the community as well, but all around. And therefore, here we are again to learn from them and to get inspired and to see what's possible in our individual communities and indeed workplaces. So you're very welcome, John, Vicky, and Frank.
Thanks a million. It's great to be here. And thanks to Giorgia and Emma Jayne for everything you shared. Learned so much. Thanks for hosting us, and very big thanks to the interpreters today. Yes, this was a small action that was taken in a very small community. We think of ourselves as a village for sure in 2014. I'm really delighted to be here with John and Frank because it was they're just so important in terms of the boycott that happened around that time. And in my own work, I suppose, in development education or global citizenship education, as you're saying, Rory, we often talk about linking the local and the global, but this was just such a powerful example of our own very small community putting this humble action forward in the context of just shocking brutality. So the story is going to be explained a little bit by John first. We often get asked to talk through the steps that we took because it's something that it appeals to them, the idea of taking this action at a community level. So we often get asked to spell out the exact steps that we took. So we're going to, in whatever short way we can, we're going to try to do that, and then passing over first to John Griffin and then Frank Naughton, because it all started at John's kitchen table. So we'll go over to him first.
Thanks. My name's John, and I'm part of this group of Vicky and Frank. And it was a Friday in August, and the farmers' market was going on in Kinvara. I live right beside it. It's outside my door, actually. And I'd been there and got a few groceries and this, that, and the other. I went back to my kitchen and put the radio on, and there was an interview going on. Brian Eno was being interviewed. He's a musician in England, and he's very much into the Palestine wars. And he was being interviewed, and during the interview he said that he just watched a documentary where a Palestinian man was carrying some meat in a plastic carrier bag, and that the meat was his 2-year-old child. And the way he explained it, and I cried, It was so touching. And I'd always been a bit of an activist on my own, and I had a pub in Kinvara at the time. And during the Gulf War, I took out American produce from my shelves, Coca-Cola and Budweiser and things like that. But anyway, I just had this light bulb moment that I'd been trying to boycott Israeli goods, but I always found it so difficult. I need glasses, and I don't walk around with reading glasses. I have to put them back on. I could read this product, where was it from, and this, that, and the other. So I had this brainwave of light bulb moment of, what about going to the businesses in Kinvara and saying, would you stop selling Israeli goods? So that was the idea. So I went back to the market, and there's a few activists selling stuff on the market, and I mentioned it to them. And they were saying, we probably need to get a meeting going. And went back to my kitchen and thought, jeepers, I'll phone up this woman I know she's actually a judge from the Seychelles Island, and I know she's an activist. Phoned her up, and she was going back to the Seychelles the next morning, And she told me about Vicky. Why don't you get in touch with Vicky? I told her the idea, phoned up Vicky, and Vicky had a chest infection. You could hardly hear her down the phone. And I said, well, this idea, and she thought it was marvelous. And I said, well, why not meet in my kitchen on Monday? Then I phoned up Frank, because I've known Frank for years. And I knew that he was an activist, and I knew that he's the most likable person in the whole of the parish. So everyone likes Frank. So if we have someone like Vicky who knows the ins and outs and how to do things, and Frank who knows everybody and the same wavelength, that's the way to go. So on Monday we met, that's just after the weekend, in my kitchen, and that's where we got our ideas together. So
basically it was about asking all the businesses in the community to stop selling the goods, and that if they all agreed, then we'd put out a public statement in relation to that. Frank, you were then thinking about, well, what did we need to know in order to make that happen? What did we need to find out?
Yeah, so I guess we at John's table, the three of us sat down and we were trying to work out what are the businesses, or to identify the businesses and the Israeli products that they might stock. And it was quite a shock to me at the time, especially I think in hardware and stuff, to see the amount of Israeli produce. Also in the medical care field, so that was a bit of an issue with the pharmacy and stuff. So that was one thing. Then we thought about approaching each business, and because it's a very small town, we thought we have to be quite strategic here and sort of get the people who have the influence and the kind of power, but more influence, I suppose, and approach them first. And then when we got 3 or 4 of the kind of more prominent ones on, we went to the other businesses and kind of said, well, we have those ones who are, leaders, sort of. And so I thought that seemed to be very important, to get like the key kind of businesses first, and then the other businesses kind of fell in behind. Not in that their gesture was any less, but it's just that I think when we went to the smaller business, they were kind of asking, well, who's in there, or who are we going to, who has already kind of signed up to this? I suppose then we had to kind of think about, where do we think the opposition was going to come from? That was quite eye-opening for me anyways. I suppose I didn't realize the power of the Israeli lobby at that time, or, that I didn't realize, I suppose, how powerful this was going to be. And that was evidenced, I think, by the support we got from the Palestinian Authority, or the Palestinian embassy, or not embassy at the time, but and getting all that through, getting the action going, writing a letter, delivering it to the businesses, and getting everybody on board. That was super. And I'll hand you back to Vicky on that.
Thanks a million. So it was just because people do ask, so we made sure that what we were asking was articulated in writing for people, and we had that printed out. We made our list of each business. We went walkabout around the community and approached them each in turn, as Frank said, in quite a specific order, and also even in terms of who approached them, thinking about whether there was people we already had connections with, or an established relationship, or who might they hear that message from the best of the three of us. So we were alternating that way. And as we said, we explained the action. If they all agreed, we would send out a press release. And we had done that within 24 hours, I suppose. And then we returned to everybody and told them that they had all agreed. So this community action was being taken. And then it was a matter of just kind of staying on top of media contacts and making sure that we were responding to them, and that the word of the boycott would spread further than just ourselves. So to maintain that momentum and build support within the community. So it was important to stay in touch with each of the businesses that were taking part, share positive feedback with them, because the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but as has been pointed out, there was a certain amount of backlash, and some of the businesses were put under pressure, that they were criticised for what they were doing. So we just tried to make sure that they were aware that there was a lot of support behind them. And then we were also just looking for other events and other ways to bring people together and help to kind of highlight the action and build a sense of community around it. So yes, the Palestinian ambassador came and visited the community, and I know that there might be a whole range of opinions that people might have about the Palestinian Authority and so on, like any other country and any other power structure. But the visit to the community was really overwhelmingly very positive. People responded to it so much, and we were really struck by the amount of people that came out just to meet him and really wanted to, show their support in a very public way. So we were thinking of ways of trying to build that support so that it's not just a what you don't do kind of action, that it's not just a boycott or refraining from something, but that it's also a positive building of something. And that was also came out in terms of how we punctuated that particular action. And there was, later on in the year, a big concert in our community centre. So, half the village was at it, basically. The ambassador came back. There was some prominent musicians, very loved musicians in our community and in Ireland and internationally, who came and supported that and did it as a fundraiser for Médecins Sans Frontières, so we could highlight the resilience of people in Gaza themselves and the work that they do in their own communities and the courage and resilience of them, but also reminding ourselves of the power of community and the importance of acting collectively, and again, as a springboard for future action. Just to address a couple of questions that come up a lot, because even 12 years on, we still get people kind of asking us as if there's a formula, and there isn't really, because as Giorgia pointed out really clearly from the beginning, each context is so specific, and we're in a very small village that we know everybody in. So that worked for us. That was part of what made this a very appealing action for us. And that was a strength that we could build on. As Saul Alinsky says, a tactic is doing what you can with what you have. So what we had was, contacts with people, a community that might be receptive to this idea. But we do get asked two questions a lot. What list did you use of items, and how long did the boycott go on? So we're aware that some campaigns call for this very extensive list, but I think Giorgia has covered this really so beautifully already. If we had walked in with one of those much longer lists of, any company that is related to Israel, we would have been asking many of the businesses just to empty their shelves. It would not have been workable. So our list was just of direct exports from Israel. So it was short and it was actionable, and we felt it had integrity, but it didn't go, to this much, much longer set of demands. Also, we framed the boycott around the bombardment that was happening at the time. It was Operation Protective Edge, or the War of the Withered Grain, I think it was known as, in Palestine. So we didn't leave it as an open-ended ask to the community. We told them specifically how long they were being asked to maintain the boycott, and the vast majority of them had maintained it to this day. Some businesses were put under incredible pressure, and one of them, I think, would have been forced to stop the boycott because of the pressure they were being under. So we made the decision we wanted to end it, or to punctuate it, I suppose, on our terms. We weren't asking people to end the boycott, obviously, but it was punctuated in that sense. But as I say, most have kept it going. I think 12 years on, people might now be finding, we did do it after 2023. We asked the community again about that to renew the boycott, and they all have done so. But I think it is a lot more complicated now with this much more extensive range of connections and infiltrations, I suppose, economically. So that's just to highlight that. And also to say that sometimes communities ask us for this list of what we did or the steps that we did, and they're in much, much bigger communities, in much more challenging situations. So I think the context that Giorgia raised in the beginning was really important. We also feel it's important just that people should be aware that there will be some backlash. They will face some quite hostile comments. The three of us, I think, have been accused of all sorts of interesting things. And it's important to push back at those. I think for us, being prepared for that was important, but to stay positive and actually just take it as a sign that you are making a difference. But even this, when I was looking for pictures a couple of days ago, why the Irish Independent put a photograph and a caption that says that, this group has been accused of burning Israeli flags. So I have, of course, sent a question to the newspaper about that, but being alert to the different ways in which that backlash gets expressed and staying positive and connected together. So the boycott was one aspect. I think it helped us to frame our village with a really strong identity of solidarity and refusal to normalize complicity, a refusal to normalize genocide. And the flowering of solidarity since then has just been extraordinary. Maybe, John, would you take a minute to mention the one that's in the poster there? Because this is one of the precious events that came afterwards.
Yeah, we had the Gaza football team came over. What year was that, Vicky?
2017, I think.
2017, yes. It was just marvellous, these bunch of young men with their coach and mentors. And they played a Kinvara team. And they were so skillful. It was unbelievable. And our Kinvara team was skillful too, because it's been going for a while. But we were all delighted that they won every game against the Kinvara lads. And the Kinvara lads were so much taller than them as well. But they just they weren't daunted by any of it. It was just a marvellous turnout. And the town turned out for them as well, because we got various things from Galway and the circus, kind of a cut-down circus where you had young people doing these circus acts, and they involved the young Palestinian players. It was just marvellous.
Yeah, it really, so it has been about looking at ways that that boycott, and BDS kind of integrates with all sorts of other things that are really about a flourishing of connection and relationships with musicians, with artists. So there's just been this incredible flourishing and a really active Palestine solidarity group that there isn't time to tell you about the amount of work that this wider group has put in. I will say that Kinvara recognised Palestine formally a year before the Irish state did. So we're always just looking for ways to kind of celebrate and promote and build that solidarity. So for us, it has been about a tactic, and a really important tactic that we could use in our context that challenged that normalization and complicity and develops that identity for us as a community. It's about developing relationships, so trying to think about what other groups can we bring in and get involved in, like the football community. The ICA did all the cakes for the last visit of the current Palestinian ambassador, Gillan. And out of those new relationships, new tactics come, or new ways of bringing in those tactics and building the movement that way. And we're delighted. Sorry, just one last thing to say, just gratitude to be in Gort Family Resource Centre. This is where we're sitting. Another, there are so many communities around us as well doing phenomenal things. We're not just like a little isolated village in Gaul or anything. There's so much. And Frank is going to come back.
Yeah, and just to say one thing that I suppose we thought on the first day that we sat down, we were thinking like, what impact could this have? Or, but I think it's very important no matter what you do, because it was a small town doing something that we thought started off as small, but it, was very significant. It had a big punch, I think, and that was, I think, evidenced best by the criticism from the Israeli lobby, that Zionist lobby. So I think anybody starting out, any small thing you can do, and it's almost, I think, if you can light fire and if you can bring one or two more people on board with any action you do, well, then that's what we need to do.
Yeah, thank you. And the framing of it, because for us, the framing was that it was the first, that this hadn't been done before. So not waiting, as I think Giorgia was saying, like that it's gradual and incremental, but find ways to celebrate or highlight steps along those increments. So that's where we were really lucky and happy to do that. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a treat to get those first-hand testimonies and experience of the journey that you've been on. And I definitely don't think it's a past tense story. It's very much alive. And even the fact that you're sharing this with people now around Ireland and around Europe on this webinar is a further ripple. And it's the old classics and cliches of acorns and movements and growth. And just reinforcing each other in small ways and big ways. And actually, some of the story reminded me of Tom Hyland, the famous Dublin bus driver who heard about East Timor, now called Timor-Leste, and the genocide that was happening there, and quit his job and started work on a kitchen table, and was instrumental alongside AFRI and so many others in Ireland in part of the East Timor freedom movement. So kitchen tables in Ireland, very powerful places, as we hear, and sometimes pubs as well, as we've just heard as well. So thank you again for amazing testimonies and the story and journey that you've been on.